Gabriel Cruz never imagined that taking a job nobody wanted would change everything. The single father and former teacher was desperate. His 9-year-old son Mateo needed heart surgery, and the teaching salary barely covered rent in their decent neighborhood. When he heard about a driver position for tech billionaire Aurora Hale, he knew why others had quit. Aurora was infamous for her impossible standards and icy detachment, living behind bulletproof glass and endless NDAs. But Gabe needed the money, and he dealt with difficult people before. What he didn't expect was how his dad jokes and persistent warmth would slowly melt the walls around the loneliest woman in Silicon Valley. What he never saw coming was the afternoon his babysitter cancelled, forcing him to bring Mateo along for the ride. That's when something magical happened. The brilliant, isolated billionaire discovered she had a gift for connecting with curious children, and Mateo found a mentor who could turn the limo's back seat into a science laboratory. But would their unexpected bond survive when scandal threatens to destroy everything they've built together? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cramped kitchen table, where Gabriel Cruz sat hunched over a stack of medical bills, his coffee growing cold as the numbers blurred together. $43,000. The figure seemed to mock him from every page of specialist consultations, pre-surgical tests, the upcoming procedure that would repair his son's heart defect. His teaching salary of $38,000 a year made it feel like trying to fill an ocean with a teacup. "Dad, you're making your worry face again," came a voice from the doorway. Mateo Cruz stood there in his Iron Man pajamas, his dark hair sticking up at impossible angles, clutching a small contraption made from cardboard, aluminum foil, and what appeared to be a miniature solar panel salvaged from a broken calculator. Gabe quickly shuffled the bills into a pile and forced a smile. "Just thinking about lesson plans, my Joe. What have you got there?" Mateo's face lit up as he carefully placed his creation on the table. "It's a solar car. I've been working on it since you told me about renewable energy. See, the sun hits this panel here, and it powers this little motor I took from my old remote control car." He demonstrated, angling the contraption toward the window. The tiny wheels began to turn slowly, and Mateo's grin could have powered the whole apartment. "That's incredible, buddy. You're going to be an engineer someday." Gabe marveled at his son's ingenuity, the way the boy's mind worked through problems with such clarity. It was a gift Gabe had always nurtured, even when money was tight, buying science kits from thrift stores and checking out library books about inventors and innovations. "Maybe I can show it to your class when you go back to teaching," Mateo said, carefully adjusting one of the wheels. "Mrs. Rodriguez says you were the best science teacher Lincoln Elementary ever had." Gabe's chest tightened. He'd been substitute teaching for 3 months now, ever since the budget cuts eliminated his position. The irregular work barely covered their basic needs, let alone Mateo's mounting medical expenses. "We'll see, my Joe. Right now, I need to focus on finding something that pays better." The job posting had been crumpled in his pocket for 2 days, rescued from the community center bulletin board, where it had been partially obscured by advertisements for babysitting services and used furniture. Personal driver needed, immediate start, competitive salary, discretion required. The phone number belonged to an executive placement agency, and when he'd called, the woman's voice had been professionally neutral, with an undertone of warning. "Mr. Cruz, I have to be honest with you. This is the 7th placement we've attempted for Ms. Hale. The position requires someone with exceptional patience. The salary is substantial, but the demands are equally so." Gabe had pressed for details, but the woman had been evasive. "NDAs will be required before we can discuss specifics. Are you available for an interview this afternoon?" Now, watching Mateo tinker with his solar car, Gabe felt the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders. His son needed that surgery within the next 4 months, according to Dr. Martinez. The heart defect, though repairable, wouldn't wait indefinitely. Each day brought more fatigue, more moments when Mateo had to sit down during their walks to the park. "Dad, are you sure you're okay?" Mateo's voice carried that mature concern that 9-year-olds shouldn't have to feel. Your face is doing that thing where your eyebrows scrunch up. Gabe reached over and ruffled his son's hair. I'm fine, Mijo. Just thinking about a new job opportunity. It might mean some changes to our routine. 40 miles away, in a glass tower that pierced the San Francisco sky like a crystal shard, Aurora Hale stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse office, watching the city wake up below. At 34, she commanded a renewable energy empire worth $12 billion, yet she felt more isolated than the wind turbines spinning silently on distant hills. Her reflection stared back at her from the bulletproof, glass-sharp cheekbones, auburn hair pulled back in a severe bun, and eyes the color of storm clouds. Behind her, the office sprawled in minimalist elegance. A desk carved from a single piece of recycled carbon fiber, walls lined with patents and awards, and a scale model of her latest solar array project that could power a small city. Ms. Hale, her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. Your driver interview is scheduled for 2 o'clock. Aurora's jaw tightened. The 7th interview in 3 months. The previous 6 had lasted an average of 2 weeks each. One had quit after she'd corrected his route through the city. Another had walked out when she'd insisted on reviewing his driving record 3 times. The most recent had lasted only 4 days before declaring her impossible to work with. She turned away from the window and walked to her desk, where 3 monitors displayed real-time data from her company's installations across 6 continents. Solar farms in Morocco, wind installations in Denmark, tidal generators off the coast of Scotland, feeding clean energy into grids that had once relied on fossil fuels. It was work that mattered, work that would leave the world better than she'd found it. But the isolation was the price. After the kidnapping attempt 2 years ago, bungled job by amateurs who'd thought her family's wealth made her an easy target, she'd built walls both literal and figurative. The penthouse was a fortress. The building's security rivaled that of government installations. Her family, once merely distant, had become openly hostile after she'd refused to pay the ransom they'd secretly negotiated, choosing instead to let the FBI handle the situation. Her phone buzzed with a text from her half-brother Marcus. Board meeting moved to Thursday. Dad's flying in from Tokyo. Time to discuss your future with the company. Aurora deleted the message without responding. She knew what that meant. Her father and the board had been circling for months, looking for any sign of weakness, any excuse to force her into a smaller role. The fact that she'd never married, never had children, never displayed the soft qualities they expected from a woman in her position, it all fed their narrative that she was too cold, too rigid to lead a company with a human face. She touched the small scar above her left eyebrow, a reminder of the kidnapping attempt. The men had been caught, but the fear lingered. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, especially when her own family had demonstrated their willingness to trade her safety for their perceived convenience. The intercom buzzed again. Ms. Hale, the placement agency confirmed your 2 o'clock appointment. Gabriel Cruz, former educator, clean driving record, excellent references. Background check complete, Aurora asked. Thorough as always. Single father, 1 dependent, no criminal history, no financial irregularities beyond standard credit card debt. Aurora nodded, though her assistant couldn't see it. And the NDAs? Prepared and ready for signature. Aurora returned to the window, watching the traffic flow through the streets below like blood through arteries. Each car carried someone with their own story, their own struggles, their own dreams. She'd forgotten what that felt like to be part of the flow, rather than suspended above it. Her phone rang, and she glanced at the caller ID. Dr. Sarah Chen, her therapist, calling for their weekly check-in. Aurora let it go to voicemail. She could predict the conversation. How are you feeling? Are you connecting with anyone? When was the last time you had a meaningful conversation with someone who wasn't on your payroll? The truth was, she'd built such effective walls that she'd forgotten how to let anyone in. The drivers, the assistants, the security personnel, they were all professional relationships, bound by contracts and NDAs. She paid them well, treated them fairly, but kept them at arm's length. It was safer that way. Her office door chimed, and she turned to see her head of security, a former Secret Service agent named Collins, entering with his usual measured stride. "Hale, I've reviewed the new driver candidate's file. He seems different from the others." "Different? How?" "More patient disposition, based on his teaching background. References describe him as someone who doesn't give up easily. His principal wrote that he once spent 6 months working with a student who had severe learning disabilities until the child was reading at grade level. Aurora considered this. Patience was certainly a quality the previous drivers had lacked. Any red flags? Only one. He's motivated by something beyond just the salary. His son needs medical treatment, expensive treatment. That could make him more reliable, or it could make him desperate enough to compromise security protocols. Aurora nodded slowly. Desperation was something she understood. She'd built her empire on the desperation to prove herself, to create something meaningful, to transform the world's relationship with energy. Maybe desperation wasn't always a liability. Schedule him for the full security briefing if he passes the initial interview, she decided. And Collins, have the car detailed. If he's going to be driving me, everything needs to be perfect. Back in his apartment, Gabe was helping Mateo with his homework when his phone rang. The placement agency number appeared on the screen. "Mr. Cruz, this is Jennifer from Executive Placement Solutions. Ms. Hale would like to schedule your interview for 2 o'clock today. Are you available?" Gabe looked at Mateo, who was struggling with a math problem about calculating the area of irregular shapes. "I can be there. What should I bring?" "Just yourself and a valid driver's license." "Oh, and Mr. Cruz, this is a unique opportunity. Ms. Hale is particular about her requirements, but she's also fair. If you can meet her standards, this position could change your life." After hanging up, Gabe sat beside his son and helped him work through the math problem, showing him how to break complex shapes into simpler ones. "Sometimes the hardest problems become easy when you look at them from a different angle," he explained. Mateo nodded, his small fingers tracing the shapes on his worksheet. "Like how your worry face gets better when you help me with something." Gabe laughed, the sound filling their small apartment with warmth. "Exactly like that, my Joe. Exactly like that." As he prepared for the interview, Gabe carefully folded Mateo's solar car project and placed it in his backpack. Not for the interview, but as a reminder of what he was fighting for, the brilliant, curious mind of his son. And the future that hung in the balance of one conversation with a woman who lived in a tower of glass and steel. The irony wasn't lost on him. Aurora Hale had built her fortune on harnessing the sun's power, while his son had built a toy that did the same thing. Perhaps that small connection, that shared appreciation for turning light into energy, into hope, might be enough to bridge the gap between their worlds. He had no idea that this simple solar car, crafted from cardboard and dreams, would become the foundation of a relationship that would transform all their lives. The Hale Industries building rose before Gabe like a monument to ambition, its glass facade reflecting the afternoon sun in patterns that reminded him of the solar panels he'd taught his students about. He'd arrived 30 minutes early, partly from nerves and partly because he'd taken 3 buses to get here, unwilling to risk his aging Honda breaking down on such an important day. The lobby was a study in controlled, elegant marble floors that seemed to stretch for miles, a reception desk carved from what looked like a single piece of dark wood, and security personnel who managed to appear both welcoming and intimidating. Gabe approached the reception desk, straightening his best tie, a navy blue one that Mateo had helped him pick out that morning. "Gabriel Cruz for Miss Hale," he said to the receptionist, a woman whose smile was professionally warm but didn't quite reach her eyes. "Of course, Mr. Cruz. Please have a seat. Someone will be with you shortly." The waiting area featured leather chairs that probably cost more than Gabe's monthly rent and coffee table books about sustainable architecture and renewable energy innovations. He picked up one about wind farm design, genuinely interested in the engineering principles, when a voice interrupted his reading. "Mr. Cruz, A man in his 40s approached, wearing a dark suit that somehow conveyed authority without ostentation. "I'm Collins, head of security. Before we proceed, there are some documents you'll need to review and sign." The NDAs were comprehensive 23 pages of legal language that essentially boiled down to one principle: what happened in Aurora. Hale's presence stayed there. Her schedule, her routes, her conversations, her moods, her personal habits, everything was confidential. The financial penalties for violation were staggering, enough to bankrupt him several times over. "Standard procedure," Collins explained as Gabe read through the documents. "Miss Hale values her privacy above almost everything else." Gabe signed, thinking of Mateo's surgery, of the bills stacking up at home, of the hope that this job represented. He'd kept secrets before. Every teacher learned to be discreet about their students' home situations, their struggles, their small victories. This couldn't be much different. 20 minutes later, an elevator whisked him to the 42nd floor in silence so complete he could hear his own heartbeat. The doors opened onto a reception area that was somehow both stark and luxurious, all clean lines and expensive materials. Another assistant, this one male and equally professional, gestured toward a pair of double doors. "Miss Hale will see you now." The office beyond was larger than Gabe's entire apartment, dominated by floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the Bay Area. But it was the woman standing with her back to him, silhouetted against that vast expanse of glass and sky, who commanded his attention. Aurora Hale turned as he entered, and Gabe's first thought was that photographs didn't capture the intensity of her presence. She was tall, probably 5'8" in her heels, with auburn hair pulled back so severely it seemed to sharpen the angles of her face. Her suit was charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, and she moved with the controlled precision of someone accustomed to command. "Mr. Cruz," her voice was crisp, businesslike. "Please, sit." She gestured to a chair across from her desk, and as Gabe settled into it, he noticed the scale model of a solar array taking up one corner of the office. The detail was extraordinary: tiny panels that actually seemed to track light, miniature transmission lines, even small figures representing maintenance workers. "Impressive, isn't it?" Aurora followed his gaze. "That's our newest installation in Nevada. When completed, it will power nearly 300,000 homes." "It's incredible," Gabe said, and meant it. "My son would love to see something like this. He's fascinated by renewable energy." Something flickered across Aurora's face: surprise, perhaps, or annoyance that he'd brought up his personal life so quickly. She moved behind her desk and opened a file. "Your background check came back clean, Mr. Cruz. Teaching credentials, clean driving record, no criminal history. References describe you as patient and reliable." She looked up at him directly for the first time. "Tell me why you want this job." The question hung in the air like a challenge. Gabe could give the safe answer: professional opportunity, career change, admiration for her company. Instead, he found himself being honest. "My son needs heart surgery. The teaching job I had was eliminated due to budget cuts, and substitute teaching doesn't pay enough to cover his medical expenses. I need this job because without it, I can't afford to save his life." Aurora's expression didn't change, but she set down the file and leaned back in her chair. "That's refreshingly direct, Mr. Cruz. Most candidates try to impress me with how much they admire my work or my company's mission." "I do admire your work," Gabe said. "But you asked why I want the job, not why I think you're impressive." For the first time, something that might have been amusement touched the corners of Aurora's mouth. "Fair enough. Let me be equally direct. I've had 6 drivers in the past 3 months. They've quit for various reasons: too demanding, too rigid, too complicated. I maintain strict schedules, I expect precise routes, and I don't engage in small talk. Can you handle that?" "I've taught middle school science for 8 years, Gabe replied. "I once had a student who tried to set the classroom on fire with a magnifying glass. Another who insisted the earth was flat despite 3 weeks of evidence to the contrary. And a class of 32 kids during a solar eclipse when half of them were convinced the world was ending. I think I can handle demanding. This time, Aurora definitely smiled, though it was gone so quickly Gabe almost missed it. The position requires availability 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. I work early, I work late, and I travel frequently. You'll need to be ready to leave at a moment's notice. I understand. I'll need to arrange childcare, but I can make it work. The car you'll be driving is armored. It weighs 8,000 pounds and handles differently than civilian vehicles. You'll need additional training. Gabe nodded. I'm a quick learner. Aurora stood and walked to the windows, her back to him again. The salary is $180,000 annually, plus health benefits that will cover your son's medical needs entirely. Gabe felt the air leave his lungs. It was more than 4 times his teaching salary, more money than he'd ever imagined making. That's very generous. It's not generosity, Mr. Cruz. It's what the job requires. I need someone who won't quit, who won't be tempted by offers from competitors or journalists, who will show up every day regardless of circumstances. She turned back to face him. The question is whether you can be that person. Looking at her standing there against the vast backdrop of the city, Gabe understood something about Aurora Hale that hadn't come through in the newspaper articles or business profiles. She wasn't just demanding, she was afraid. Afraid of being let down, afraid of trusting the wrong person, afraid of the vulnerability that came with depending on someone else. Ms. Hale, he said quietly, I've been taking care of my son on my own for 7 years. I've never missed a parent-teacher conference, a doctor's appointment, or a bedtime story. When I commit to something, I follow through. If you give me this job, I'll be here every day until you don't need me anymore. Aurora studied his face for a long moment, as if looking for cracks in his sincerity. Finally, she walked back to her desk and pulled out a business card. Collins will arrange your security training and vehicle certification. You start Monday at 6 a.m. Don't be late. As Gabe took the card, their fingers brushed briefly. Her hands were smaller than he'd expected, and cold. Thank you, he said. You won't regret this. I hope not, Mr. Cruz. I really hope not. Walking back through the lobby 20 minutes later, Gabe felt as if he were moving through a dream. In his pocket, the business card felt like a talisman, a promise that Mateo's surgery would happen, that their lives were about to change in ways he couldn't yet imagine. He pulled out his phone to call Mateo's babysitter with the good news, but paused as he passed the building's main entrance. Through the glass doors, he could see Aurora's armored sedan waiting at the curb black, imposing and somehow lonely despite the driver behind the wheel. Tomorrow, that would be his responsibility. Tomorrow, he would become part of Aurora Hale's carefully controlled world, tasked with keeping safe a woman who seemed to trust no one and need everyone. As he walked toward the bus stop, Gabe found himself wondering what had happened to make someone so successful also so isolated. Whatever it was, he had the feeling he was about to find out. Monday arrived with the kind of crisp October morning that made San Francisco feel like a postcard. Gabe had been awake since 4:30, checking and double-checking his appearance, reviewing the security protocols Collins had drilled into him during 3 intensive training sessions. The armored sedan handled like a tank with leather seats, but he'd practiced the routes until he could navigate them in his sleep. At exactly 6 a.m., he pulled up to Aurora's building, the engine purring with the quiet confidence of German engineering. The underground garage was a maze of concrete and steel, with security cameras tracking his every movement. He positioned the car precisely where Collins had shown him driver's door, exactly 12 feet from the elevator, engine running, ready for immediate departure. Aurora emerged from the elevator at 6:03, and Gabe's first lesson in working for her began immediately. She moved with purposeful efficiency, her charcoal coat flowing behind her like a cape, her expression already focused on whatever challenge the day would bring. She didn't acknowledge his greeting, sliding into the back seat as if he were part of the car's machinery. Moscone Center, South Entrance, she said, her phone already at her ear. And take Van Ness Market Street will be backed up. The drive through the city was a masterclass in controlled chaos. Aurora conducted 3 different conference calls, reviewed documents on her tablet, and somehow managed to apply lipstick at a red light without missing a beat in her conversation about wind turbine efficiency ratings. Gabe found himself oddly impressed by her ability to compartmentalize, to function at such a high level while surrounded by the mundane reality of traffic and construction. "Driver," she said as they approached the Moscone Center, and it took Gabe a moment to realize she was addressing him. "Circle the block. I'll be 20 minutes. For the next 20 minutes, Gabe drove in careful loops, observing the ebb and flow of the city, the way morning commuters moved with their own rhythms and purposes. When Aurora reappeared, she was accompanied by 2 men in expensive suits who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. "Afternoon session moved to 4, one of them was saying as they approached the car. "Henderson's people are pushing back on the quarterly projections." "Let them push," Aurora replied, settling back into her seat. "The numbers are solid. If they want to argue with physics, that's their problem." As they drove to her next appointment, Gabe caught glimpses of Aurora in the rearview mirror. She was studying a photograph of what looked like a massive industrial facility, making notes in precise handwriting on the margins. Her concentration was absolute, but there was something else there, too, a tension in the set of her shoulders, a tightness around her eyes that spoke of pressures beyond the merely professional. The rest of the morning followed a similar pattern: efficient arrivals, precisely timed departures, Aurora treating him like a component of the car rather than a person. It wasn't personal, he realized. It was protective. Keep the walls up, keep the relationships professional, minimize the risk of disappointment or betrayal. During their lunch break, Aurora had a working meal in a private dining room. While he waited in the car, Gabe pulled out the worn photograph from his wallet. Mateo, at his last soccer game before the doctor had restricted his activities, grinning despite the exhaustion that had become increasingly visible in recent months. The picture reminded him why he was here, why he could accept being treated like furniture if it meant his son would get the treatment he needed. The afternoon brought them to the financial district, where Aurora had a meeting with her board of directors. As they pulled up to the sleek office building, Gabe noticed the change in her demeanor. The efficient confidence was still there, but it was armored now, defensive in a way that suggested these weren't allies she was meeting with. "Wait here," she said, then paused with her hand on the door handle. "Actually, Mr. Cruz, let me ask you something. Do you have any experience dealing with people who smile at you while planning to stab you in the back?" The question was so unexpected that Gabe answered honestly. "School board meetings, PTA politics. You'd be surprised how vicious people can get when they're fighting over bake sale profits." For a moment, Aurora's professional mask slipped, and she almost smiled. "I imagine I would be. Thank you for the perspective." She was gone for 2 hours, and when she returned, the armored confidence had been replaced by something that looked like barely controlled anger. She slid into the back seat and sat in silence for a full minute before giving him an address in Pacific Heights. The drive up the steep streets was tense with unspoken frustration. Gabe could feel Aurora's mood radiating from the back seat like heat from a furnace. Finally, as they crested a particularly steep hill, he decided to risk breaking the professional silence. "Rough meeting?" he asked, keeping his eyes on the road. There was a long pause before Aurora answered. "My father and the board think I'm too focused on long-term sustainability and not focused enough on quarterly profits. They want me to approve a natural gas project that would boost short-term revenues. But you don't want to approve it. I built this company to get away from fossil fuels, not to embrace them for convenience." Her voice carried a bitter edge. "Apparently, that makes me naive and idealistic." Gabe navigated around a double-parked car before responding. "My son built a solar-powered car out of cardboard and calculator parts. His teacher told him it was too ambitious for the science fair, that he should do something simpler. You know what he said?" "What?" "He said that settling for simple was how people ended up with boring lives." Gabe glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Aurora watching him with something that might have been curiosity. Sometimes the people who call you naive are just scared that you might actually succeed. The silence that followed was different from the professional quiet of the morning warmer, more thoughtful. As they pulled up to Aurora's building, she didn't immediately get out of the car. "Mr. Cruz," she said finally, "tomorrow morning we're leaving at 5:30. There's a site visit in Sacramento, and the drive will give us time to discuss some strategic considerations." "Of course, Miss Hale. And Mr. Cruz, thank you for the perspective. It's been a while since anyone offered me any." As Gabe watched her disappear into the building, he realized that something had shifted during their conversation. For just a moment, Aurora Hale had let him see past the professional armor to the person underneath, someone who was fighting battles on multiple fronts, trying to stay true to her principles while surrounded by people who valued profit over purpose. Driving home through the evening traffic, Gabe found himself thinking about the photograph Aurora had been studying that morning, some kind of industrial facility that seemed to matter deeply to her. He wondered what dreams and ambitions were tied up in that project, what vision of the future she was fighting to protect. When he got home, Mateo was at the kitchen table working on math homework, the solar car positioned nearby like a talisman of possibility. His son looked up with the bright smile that made every difficult moment worthwhile. "How was the first day, Dad?" "Interesting," Gabe said, settling into the chair beside him. "I think this job is going to teach me more than I expected." "About driving?" "About people," Gabe replied, helping Mateo with a particularly tricky problem involving percentages. "Sometimes the most successful people are also the loneliest." "Is she lonely?" Gabe considered the question, thinking about Aurora's precise movements, her careful distance, the way she'd almost smiled when he'd shared Mateo's story about the science fair. "I think so," he said finally, "but maybe that's about to change." 3 weeks into the job, Gabe had developed a rhythm with Aurora's demanding schedule. Early mornings became easier when he realized she appreciated punctuality more than conversation, and the long drives gave him time to observe the subtle changes in her mood that preceded important decisions or difficult meetings. She was, he'd learned, like a complex piece of machinery, precise, efficient, but requiring careful attention to the small signs that indicated when maintenance was needed. The crisis began on a Thursday morning with a phone call that shattered their carefully established routine. Gabe was reviewing the day's schedule when his phone rang, displaying the number for Sunshine Daycare. "Mr. Cruz, this is Maria from Sunshine. I'm so sorry, but I have to close the center today. My daughter's in the emergency room, and I can't find anyone to cover." Gabe felt his stomach drop. Maria had been watching Mateo before and after school for 2 years, and she'd never missed a day. "Is she okay? Your daughter?" "Appendicitis, but she'll be fine. I'm just so sorry about the short notice. I know you can't miss work." After hanging up, Gabe stared at his phone, running through his limited options. His sister lived in Portland. His ex-wife had remarried and moved to Phoenix years ago. The neighbors he trusted all worked during the day. He was supposed to pick up Aurora in 40 minutes for a day that included 3 board meetings and a site visit to a manufacturing facility in San Jose. His phone buzzed with a text from Mateo. "Dad, Mrs. Rodriguez says I can't stay after school today because they're fumigating the building. Where should I go?" The decision crystallized with uncomfortable clarity. He had to take Mateo with him. It violated every protocol Collins had established, broke multiple security procedures, and would almost certainly end his employment. But the alternative was leaving his 9-year-old son alone for 12 hours, and that wasn't a choice he could make. When he arrived at Aurora's building, Mateo was sitting quietly in the back seat, wearing his best clothes and clutching a backpack filled with homework, books, and his solar car project. The hospital bracelet on his small wrist, a reminder of his last cardiology appointment, seemed to glow in the morning light. "Dad, are you sure this is okay?" Mateo whispered as they waited for Aurora to appear. "No," Gabe admitted, "but sometimes you have to do what's right instead of what's safe." Aurora emerged from the elevator at exactly 6 a.m., her usual brisk pace faltering when she saw the extra passenger. She approached the car slowly, her expression unreadable behind her professional mask. "Mr. Cruz," she said as she opened the rear door and saw Mateo sitting there like a small, well-dressed refugee. "I believe we need to discuss the passenger manifest." "Miss Hale, I can explain." "I'm Mateo," the boy said, offering his hand with the polite gravity that always made Gabe proud. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, ma'am. My babysitter had a family emergency and Dad couldn't leave me alone." Aurora looked at the offered hand for a moment, then shook it with the same seriousness Mateo had offered. "I'm Aurora, and you're not an inconvenience, Mateo. You're an unexpected variable in a carefully planned system." She slid into the back seat, positioning herself in the far corner, as if trying to maximize the distance between herself and the child. Gabe started the engine, waiting for the explosion that would end his employment. "Mr. Cruz," Aurora said finally, "I assume you understand that this violates several security protocols." "Yes, ma'am. And that bringing unauthorized personnel into my vehicle could result in immediate termination." "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Now that we've established that, let's proceed to the first appointment. And Mateo?" She turned to the boy, who had been following the conversation with wide eyes. "Do you have homework to do today?" "Yes, ma'am. Math and a science report on renewable energy sources." For the first time since Gabe had known her, Aurora looked genuinely surprised. "Renewable energy? What's your focus?" "Solar power," Mateo said, his initial nervousness giving way to enthusiasm. "Did you know that enough sunlight hits the Earth in 1 hour to power the whole world for a year? But we only capture a tiny fraction of it." "I did know that," Aurora said slowly. "It's one of the fundamental challenges my company works to address." As they drove toward the first meeting, Gabe listened to an increasingly animated conversation developing in the back seat. Mateo, once he realized Aurora was genuinely interested in his science report, began peppering her with questions about photovoltaic cells, energy storage, and grid integration. Aurora, to Gabe's amazement, answered each question with patience and precision, occasionally asking follow-up questions that revealed the depth of Mateo's curiosity. "Can I show you something?" Mateo asked as they waited in traffic. He carefully extracted his solar car from his backpack, placing it on the seat between them. "I built this from recycled parts. The panel is from a broken calculator, and the motor is from an old remote control car." Aurora examined the small device with the same attention she gave to billion-dollar projects. "The wiring is quite elegant," she said, "and the gear ratio you've chosen maximizes efficiency over speed. That's sophisticated thinking." "Dad taught me that efficiency is more important than flashiness," Mateo said, beaming at the praise. "Your father is a wise man," Aurora replied, glancing at Gabe in the rearview mirror with something that might have been respect. The morning's meetings took on a surreal quality. While Aurora conducted business in conference rooms and offices, Mateo sat quietly in the car working on his homework, occasionally asking Gabe questions about his math problems. During breaks, Aurora would return to the car and inevitably find herself drawn back into conversation with the boy, who seemed genuinely fascinated by her work. "Why did you decide to work with renewable energy?" Mateo asked during their lunch break. Aurora was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the parking lot where they'd stopped for sandwiches. "Because the world my generation inherited was damaged," she said finally. "I wanted to leave something better for the people who come after us. Like me, like you." The afternoon brought them to the manufacturing facility in San Jose, where Aurora was scheduled to inspect a new production line for solar panel components. As they walked through the facility, Mateo stayed close to Gabe, his eyes wide at the scale of the operation robots assembling delicate electronic components. Technicians in clean suits monitoring quality control stations, massive sheets of photovoltaic material moving through automated cutting systems. "This is where we turn silicon and sunlight into electricity," Aurora explained, addressing Mateo as seriously as she would any adult visitor. "Each panel that comes off this line will generate clean power for 25 years or more." "It's like magic," Mateo breathed, watching a robotic arm precisely place components on a panel substrate. It's better than magic, Aurora said. It's science. Magic is temporary and unpredictable. Science is permanent and reliable. On the drive back to the city, Mateo fell asleep in the back seat, his head resting against the window, the hospital bracelet, a reminder of his fragility. Aurora watched him sleep, her expression softer than Gabe had ever seen it. "He's remarkable," she said quietly. "How old did you say he was?" 9. "But he's been curious about everything since he could talk. Sometimes I think he understands the world better than most adults." "The heart condition, it's serious?" Gabe nodded, keeping his eyes on the road. "Ventricular septal defect. Repairable, but it needs to be done soon. He gets tired easily, can't run around like other kids his age." "The surgery will fix it?" "Completely. He'll be able to do anything, sports, hiking, whatever he wants. He just needs the chance." Aurora was quiet for the rest of the drive, but when they reached her building, she didn't immediately get out of the car. "Mr. Cruz," she said finally, "I'm scheduling a company tour for next Friday. Educational outreach program. Mateo is welcome to attend if his school situation allows." "You don't have to." "I'm not doing it for you," Aurora said, but her tone was gentle rather than sharp. "I'm doing it for him. Children like Mateo are why the work matters." As she walked toward her building, Gabe gently shook Mateo awake. His son stretched and yawned, blinking in the late afternoon light. "Are we home, Dad?" "Almost, my Joe. What did you think of today?" Mateo considered the question with the seriousness he brought to everything important. "I think she's lonely, but she's trying not to be, and I think she really loves her work." "What makes you say that?" "The way her voice changes when she talks about helping the world. It gets warmer, like yours does when you talk about teaching." Mateo gathered his backpack and carefully secured his solar car. "I hope she'll let me come back sometime." "I think," Gabe said, remembering the unexpected gentleness in Aurora's voice, "she might surprise us both." The prototype solar panel kit arrived on a Wednesday morning in a package marked with Aurora's personal address, delivered to Gabe's apartment by a courier who seemed surprised to be making such a high-security delivery to a modest building in the Mission District. The kit was beautifully designed, professional-grade components, scaled down for educational use, complete with a comprehensive manual that explained not just how to assemble the panels, but the physics principles that made them work. Mateo's reaction was everything Gabe could have hoped for and more. His son unpacked each component with the reverence of an archaeologist, discovering artifacts, reading the manual with intense concentration, asking questions that revealed both his growing understanding and his natural curiosity. "Dad, look at this," Mateo said, holding up a small photovoltaic cell that caught the morning light streaming through their kitchen window. Ms. Aurora included a note. The note was written in Aurora's precise handwriting. "For a young scientist who understands that efficiency matters more than flashiness, build something amazing. A.H." "She remembered what I said about your teaching," Mateo marveled. "That's really cool." Over the following weeks, the solar panel kit became the centerpiece of their evenings together. After Gabe returned from work and Mateo finished his homework, they would spread the components across their small kitchen table and work together to understand how photons became electrons, how electrons became current, how current became power. It was, Gabe realized, the kind of hands-on learning experience he'd always dreamed of providing in his classroom, but had never had the resources to make happen. The changes in Aurora were more subtle but equally significant. She had begun acknowledging Gabe's presence with something approaching warmth, asking about Mateo's progress with the solar kit, occasionally sharing observations about renewable energy technology that she thought might interest a 9-year-old with an engineer's curiosity. The conversations were still professional, but there were moments when her guard dropped and Gabe caught glimpses of the person behind the corporate armor. "How's the young scientist progressing?" she asked one morning as they drove to a meeting with city planners about a proposed solar installation on public buildings. "He's built 3 different configurations so far," Gabe replied. "Last night he was trying to figure out how to create a tracking system that would follow the sun throughout the day." "Impressive. Most adults struggle with the concept of optimal angle adjustment. He said it was like a sunflower, always turning toward the light. Sometimes his analogies are better than the technical explanations. Aurora was quiet for a moment, and when Gabe glanced in the rearview mirror, he saw her staring out the window with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Children see things more clearly sometimes," she said finally. "They haven't learned to complicate simple truths." The city planning meeting was one of Aurora's more frustrating professional encounters. The officials were polite but skeptical, worried about costs and maintenance, unconvinced that solar installations on municipal buildings would provide sufficient return on investment. Aurora presented her case with calm precision, but Gabe could see the tension building in the set of her shoulders, the controlled intensity in her voice. "The initial investment is substantial," she acknowledged, "but the long-term savings are undeniable. These installations will pay for themselves within 7 years and continue generating clean energy for decades after that." "Ms. Hale," said the city's financial officer, a man whose skepticism seemed permanently etched into his features, "we appreciate your company's commitment to environmental responsibility, but we have to think about practical concerns. What happens when the technology becomes obsolete? What about maintenance costs, weather damage?" "The technology has a proven track record of 25-year operational lifespans," Aurora replied. "The maintenance requirements are minimal, and the panels are designed to withstand extreme weather conditions. But the upfront costs are an investment in the city's future," Aurora finished, her patience clearly wearing thin. "Every day you delay is another day of buying power from the grid instead of generating your own." The meeting ended without a commitment, the officials promising to take everything under consideration, with the tone of people who had already made up their minds. As they walked back to the car, Aurora's frustration was palpable. 40 years of climate science, 10 years of proven solar technology, and they're still worried about the initial investment, she said, settling into the back seat with barely controlled exasperation. "Maybe they need to see it from a different perspective," Gabe suggested as he started the engine. "What do you mean?" "When I was teaching, I learned that you can't always convince people with facts and figures. Sometimes you have to help them see how the idea connects to something they already care about." Aurora considered this. "And what do city officials care about?" "Votes," Gabe said simply. "If you can show them that solar installations will make their constituents happy, they'll find the money. Public opinion over fiscal responsibility. Public opinion often drives fiscal responsibility. If voters want clean energy, officials will figure out how to pay for it." That afternoon, Aurora made an unexpected decision. Instead of returning to her office, she asked Gabe to drive to Lincoln Elementary School, where he'd taught before the budget cuts. "I want to see something," she said as they pulled into the school's parking lot. The building was a typical urban elementary school, older but well-maintained, with a playground that had seen better days and windows that could use updating. Aurora studied the structure with the same intensity she brought to her business meetings. "How many students?" she asked. "About 400, grades K through 5, most of them from families that are working hard just to get by. The roof looks solid, good southern exposure, minimal shading from surrounding buildings." Aurora was clearly evaluating the building's solar potential. This would be an ideal pilot project. For solar panels? For community engagement. Install a comprehensive solar system here. Design it as an educational tool as well as an energy source. Let the children learn about renewable energy while their school saves money on utilities. Gabe felt a spark of excitement. The kids would love that. Hands-on science education that actually matters to their daily lives. Exactly. And the parents would see tangible benefits: lower utility costs, meaning more money for programs and supplies. They sat in the car for a while, both looking at the school and imagining the possibilities. Aurora was clearly working through the logistics in her mind, while Gabe was thinking about the teaching opportunities such a project would create. "Miss Hale," he said finally, "can I ask you something personal?" "You can ask. I reserve the right not to answer." "Why?" Renewable energy. I mean, you could have made money in any industry. Why choose something that requires you to fight for every project? Aurora was quiet for so long that Gabe thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight of memory. When I was 12, my family took a vacation to visit my grandmother in West Virginia. Coal country. The mountains were beautiful, but the valleys were poisoned. Dead streams, mining waste, children with asthma rates 3 times the national average. She paused, staring at the school building. My grandmother told me that her generation had traded the future for the present, that someone needed to figure out how to give the future back. So you decided to be that someone. I decided to try. Some days I think I'm making progress. Other days I sit in meetings with city officials who are more worried about quarterly budgets than generational impact, and I wonder if I'm just tilting at windmills. But windmills generate power, Gabe said, earning a surprised laugh from Aurora. That's terrible, she said, but she was smiling. Mateo gets his sense of humor from you, doesn't he? I'm afraid so. He's been telling renewable energy jokes all week. Yesterday he asked me why solar panels never get tired. I'm almost afraid to ask. Because they're always charged up. Aurora groaned, but the sound carried genuine amusement. I'm going to have to start a joke collection for him. As they drove back into the city, Gabe found himself thinking about the school project Aurora had envisioned. It was ambitious, the kind of comprehensive program that could transform not just the building, but the entire community's relationship with energy and environmental responsibility. It was also exactly the kind of project that would require someone with teaching experience to design the educational components. Miss Hale, he said as they approached her building, if you were serious about the school project, I'd like to help with the educational design. You want to go back to teaching? I want to combine teaching with something that matters. What you're talking about, that's the kind of program that could change how kids think about science, about their impact on the world. Aurora was quiet for a moment, considering. It would be a significant undertaking, months of planning, coordination with school administrators, community outreach, and there's no guarantee the city would approve the funding. But if they did, I'd want someone who understands both education and renewable energy to lead the community engagement. Someone who could explain complex concepts in simple terms, who could get parents and children excited about the possibilities. Someone like a former science teacher who's been learning about solar technology from his 9-year-old son. Something like that, Aurora said, and there was warmth in her voice that Gabe had never heard before. That evening, as Gabe helped Mateo work on his latest solar panel configuration, he found himself imagining a classroom full of children, learning the same lessons, building their own projects, discovering that science wasn't just about memorizing facts, but about solving real problems in their own community. Dad, you're making your thinking face, Mateo observed, carefully adjusting the angle of his panel to catch the last rays of evening sunlight coming through their window. Just imagining possibilities, Mijo. How would you feel if other kids got to build solar projects like yours? That would be awesome. Could I teach them what I've learned? Maybe you could. Miss Aurora and I were talking about bringing solar power to your old school. Mateo's eyes lit up with excitement. Really? The whole school could have solar panels, and we could show other kids how they work? It's just an idea right now, but yes, something like that. Dad, that would be the coolest thing ever. Better than any science fair project. As Gabe watched his son's enthusiasm, he realized that Aurora's vision wasn't just about generating clean energy or saving money on utility bills. It was about creating connections between technology and education, between environmental responsibility and community pride, between the isolated brilliance of someone like Aurora and the natural curiosity of children like Mateo. The prototype solar panel kit sat on their kitchen table, catching the reflection of their overhead light, a bridge between the world Aurora had built and the world Gabe was raising his son to inherit. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new meetings, new opportunities to prove that renewable energy wasn't just economically viable, but personally meaningful. For the first time since taking the job, Gabe felt like he was doing more than just driving Aurora from one appointment to another. He was helping her connect with something she'd almost forgotten: the simple joy of sharing knowledge with someone eager to learn, the satisfaction of building something together, the possibility that her work could touch individual lives in ways that quarterly reports could never measure. The invitation arrived on cream-colored cardstock so thick it felt substantial in Gabe's hands. Embossed lettering announced the Hale Industries' annual Sustainability Gala, an event that brought together environmental leaders, investors, and policymakers for what Aurora had described as strategic networking disguised as a dinner party. "Mr. Cruz," Aurora said as they drove to yet another contentious board meeting, "I'd like you to attend the gala next Friday. Professional development opportunity." Gabe almost missed the turn onto Montgomery Street. "I'm not sure I understand. Aren't I supposed to drive you there and wait in the car?" "Normally, yes. But this year I'm implementing a new community outreach initiative. I want you there as my education consultant to discuss the school solar project with potential sponsors." Education consultant? You have teaching credentials, field experience, and hands-on knowledge of renewable energy systems. That makes you more qualified than most of the consultants who charge $500 an hour to tell me what I already know. The gala was being held at the Legion of Honor Museum, with its commanding view of the Golden Gate Bridge and the Pacific beyond. As they pulled up to the valet station, Gabe caught sight of Aurora emerging from the building's main entrance, and for a moment he didn't recognize her. Gone was the severe business attire, replaced by an elegant navy dress that somehow managed to be both sophisticated and approachable. Her hair was styled in soft waves rather than the usual severe bun, and she moved with a confidence that seemed less armored, more natural. She looked, Gabe realized, like someone who was comfortable in her own skin rather than constantly defending it. "Wow," Mateo said from the back seat, where he'd been reading quietly. "Miss Aurora looks really pretty." She did indeed, but more than that, she looked happy, genuinely pleased, rather than professionally satisfied. As she approached the car, Gabe noticed she was carrying a small wrapped package. "Good evening, Mateo," she said as she settled into the back seat. "I brought you something." The package contained a book, Solar Energy for Young Scientists, along with a small device that looked like a miniature weather station. "It measures solar irradiance, temperature, and humidity," Aurora explained. "I thought you might want to collect data on how weather conditions affect your solar car's performance." Mateo's excitement was infectious. "This is so cool. I can make charts and graphs like a real scientist." "You are a real scientist," Aurora said firmly. "You make hypotheses, conduct experiments, and analyze results. That's what scientists do." During the drive to the gala, Aurora coached Gabe on the evening's dynamics. The key sponsors will be the Patterson Foundation. They fund educational initiatives, and Meridian Ventures, which invests in sustainable technology with social impact components. Both groups care more about community engagement than pure profit margins. What should I emphasize? The human element. These people can read financial projections and environmental impact studies anywhere. What they can't get from a PowerPoint presentation is the story of a 9-year-old boy building solar cars at his kitchen table, learning that he can be part of the solution to climate change. The gala was a study in controlled elegance. The museum's galleries had been transformed into a sophisticated dinner venue, with round tables positioned to take advantage of the spectacular views. Guests moved between cocktail stations and interactive displays, showcasing Hale Industries' latest innovations, next-generation solar panels, wind turbine efficiency improvements, battery storage systems that could power entire neighborhoods. Aurora introduced Gabe to a succession of potential sponsors, and he found himself surprised by how naturally the conversations flowed. These weren't just wealthy philanthropists looking for tax deductions. They were people who genuinely cared about environmental education and community development. When he described Mateo's solar car project and Aurora's vision for comprehensive school installations, he saw immediate interest and engagement. The beautiful thing about this approach, he explained to Rebecca Patterson, whose foundation had funded dozens of educational initiatives, is that it combines hands-on learning with real community benefit. The children learn by doing, and their families see immediate results in lower utility bills. It sounds like exactly the kind of integrated programming we're looking for, Rebecca replied. Too many educational grants fund programs that exist in isolation. This would connect classroom learning to actual community improvement. James Meridian, a venture capitalist whose firm specialized in social impact investing, was equally enthusiastic. The scalability potential is enormous, he said. If you can demonstrate success at one school, it becomes a model for districts across the country. As the evening progressed, Gabe noticed changes in how people interacted with Aurora. The usual professional deference was still there, but it was tempered with something warmer, genuine affection from colleagues who seemed to be seeing a different side of her personality. "You're like a different person tonight," Gabe observed during a quiet moment when they'd stepped onto one of the museum's terraces. "I feel like a different person," Aurora admitted. "Usually these events feel like performance, art smile, network, secure funding, repeat. Tonight feels like sharing something that actually matters. The school project, the possibility of it, the idea that my work could connect directly to children's lives, could inspire the next generation of environmental scientists." She paused, looking out at the bridge lights reflecting on the dark water. "Mateo changed how I think about what I do. Before, it was about systems and efficiency and market share. Now it's about the fact that he'll inherit whatever world we create. He has that effect on people. His teachers always said he made them remember why they became educators in the first place." "How do you do it?" Aurora asked suddenly. "Raise him alone, I mean. Keep him curious and optimistic, despite everything he's dealing with." The question was more personal than anything she'd asked before, and Gabe considered his answer carefully. "I learned from him as much as I teach him. Children have this natural resilience, this ability to find joy in small discoveries. My job isn't to protect him from the world, it's to help him understand that he can make the world better, even when the world seems determined to resist improvement. Especially then, Mateo's generation won't have the luxury of cynicism. They'll have to be the ones who solve the problems my generation created." Aurora was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried a vulnerability that surprised him. "I've spent so much time building walls to protect my work that I forgot why the work mattered in the first place. These past few weeks, watching you with Mateo, seeing how naturally you explain complex ideas, it's reminded me that environmental science isn't just about data and projections, it's about people." "You're good with people," Gabe said. "You're patient with Mateo. You listen to his questions. You take his ideas seriously. That's not something you can fake. But I don't know how to be that way with adults, with people who might judge me or use my openness against me. Maybe start with people who aren't looking to judge you, people who want the same things you want." As they rejoined the party, Gabe watched Aurora navigate the remaining conversations with a more relaxed confidence. She laughed at jokes, asked about people's families, shared stories about innovative projects that went beyond mere technical specifications. By the end of the evening, both the Patterson Foundation and Meridian Ventures had committed to preliminary funding discussions for the school solar initiative. "I think tonight was a success," Aurora said as they walked back to the car. "The funding commitments definitely suggest so. Not just the funding, the whole evening. I haven't enjoyed a professional event like that in years." As they drove through the quiet city streets, Aurora seemed reflective rather than tired. "Mr. Cruz, I've been thinking about offering you a different position. Community Outreach Coordinator for Educational Initiatives. It would mean working directly on projects like the school installation, developing curriculum, training teachers, coordinating with families." Gabe felt his heart skip. "That sounds like everything I've ever wanted to do professionally. The salary would be comparable to what you're earning as my driver, but the work would be more fulfilling. At least, I hope it would be. What about driving? What about your schedule and security protocols? Collins has been suggesting I need more independence anyway. And honestly, having you focused on the community programs would be more valuable than having you drive me to meetings where we discuss those same programs. When would this start? As soon as you're ready. We could announce it at the school board meeting next week, assuming they approve the pilot project. As they pulled up to Aurora's building, she didn't immediately get out of the car. Mr. Cruz, thank you for tonight, for helping me remember that business doesn't have to be purely transactional, that professional relationships can be personal without being vulnerable. Thank you for trusting me with something that matters to you. It matters to all of us, Aurora replied. That's what I forgot somewhere along the way. Climate change isn't my personal crusade, it's our shared challenge. And solving it requires building connections, not just installing solar panels. As Gabe drove home, he thought about calling Mateo to share the evening's developments, but decided to wait until morning. Tonight's news deserved a proper celebration, the kind that included pancakes and solar panel experiments and planning for a future that suddenly looked brighter than either of them had dared to imagine. The forged documents arrived like a poison-tipped arrow, delivered through the morning news cycle with surgical precision. Gabe was having breakfast with Mateo, both of them excited about the school board meeting scheduled for that afternoon, when his phone began ringing with calls from numbers he didn't recognize. "Dad, why do you have so many missed calls?" Mateo asked, looking up from his cereal bowl where he'd been conducting what he called a density experiment with different types of cereal. Before Gabe could answer, his phone rang again. This time it was Aurora, and her voice carried a tension he'd never heard before. "Mr. Cruz, do not speak to any reporters. Do not answer any calls from unknown numbers. Come to my office immediately." "What's wrong?" "Someone has leaked confidential documents suggesting you've been selling information about my schedule and security protocols to competitors. The story breaks in an hour." The drive to Aurora's building felt surreal, like traveling through a landscape that had suddenly become foreign and hostile. Photographers were already gathering outside the Hale Industries building, and Gabe had to circle the block twice before Collins could arrange secure entrance through the underground garage. Aurora's office had been transformed into a crisis management center. Lawyers, public relations specialists, and security personnel filled the space, their urgent conversations creating a buzz of anxiety that seemed to vibrate in the air itself. Aurora stood at the windows, her back rigid with controlled fury, while her half-brother Marcus occupied her desk chair like a conquering general. "Gabriel," Aurora said without turning around, "I need you to see something." Collins handed him a tablet displaying what appeared to be bank statements, email correspondence, and internal Hale Industries documents bearing his electronic signature. According to the fabricated evidence, Gabe had been systematically providing Aurora's competitors with detailed information about her meetings, travel plans, and business strategies in exchange for payments totaling nearly $50,000. "This is completely fake," Gabe said, his voice barely steady. "I've never seen these documents before. I don't even have access to half this information." "We know that," Aurora replied, finally turning to face him. "But the evidence is sophisticated enough to convince anyone who doesn't know you personally." Marcus looked up from the desk with an expression of barely concealed satisfaction. "The question is whether we can contain the damage before it destroys Aurora's credibility with the board." "The damage to my credibility?" Aurora's voice could have cut glass. "Gabriel's reputation is being destroyed by fabricated evidence. That seems like the more immediate concern." "Aurora, you have to think strategically here," Marcus continued. "The board already questions your judgment about personnel decisions. This incident will confirm their worst fears about your inability to maintain proper security protocols." "Their worst fears," Aurora repeated slowly, "or their best hopes?" The room went quiet, and Gabe felt the undercurrents of family politics swirling around him like a dangerous tide. He was beginning to understand that his situation was merely a weapon in a larger battle for control of Aurora's company. "Ms. Hale," said one of the lawyers, a sharp-faced woman whose voice carried the authority of expensive education, We need to discuss your options. If you distance yourself from Mr. Cruz immediately, we can frame this as a security breach that you discovered and reported. It protects your position while containing the scandal. And if I don't distance myself from him, then you're tied to the story. Every business decision you've made, every project you've championed, becomes suspect. The board will use this as justification for removing you from operational control. Aurora walked to her desk and picked up one of the forged documents. Tell me something, Marcus. How did these documents come to light? Who brought them to the media's attention? Anonymous tip, apparently. Someone with access to both internal systems and external financial records. Someone with the technical expertise to forge electronic signatures and create convincing bank statements? Aurora, what are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that whoever did this had to know enough about our security protocols to make the forgeries believable, enough about Gabriel's personal situation to make the motive credible, and enough about media timing to maximize damage to my position before the board meeting next week. Marcus's expression remained carefully neutral, but Gabe noticed that he'd stopped making eye contact with Aurora. That's a serious accusation to make without evidence. Evidence like this? Aurora pulled out her phone and scrolled to a text message thread. Your message yesterday asking about my confidence in my current staffing decisions, your suggestion that I might want to reassess personnel security before the board meeting, your recommendation that I consider more traditional approaches to company management. That's circumstantial at best. Perhaps, but it's interesting timing. Collins stepped forward, his security training evident in the way he positioned himself to observe everyone's reactions. Ms. Hale, I've completed a preliminary investigation of the document trail. The forgeries are sophisticated, but they contain anomalies that suggest inside knowledge of our systems combined with external technical resources. What kind of anomalies? The electronic signatures use an encryption key that was rotated out of our system 3 months ago. Only someone with archived access would have been able to replicate it. Aurora turned to Marcus with an expression that could have melted steel. Marcus, didn't you insist on maintaining archived access to all company systems when we updated our security protocols last quarter? That's standard practice for board oversight. For oversight, not for corporate sabotage. The confrontation was interrupted by Gabe's phone ringing. When he glanced at the screen, his blood went cold. Mateo's school was calling. I have to take this, he said, stepping away from the group. Mr. Cruz, the school secretary's voice was apologetic but firm. I'm sorry to bother you, but we have reporters here asking about Mateo. The principal thought you should know. Reporters? At the school? They're asking about your relationship with Ms. Hale, about whether Mateo has been to her office or her facility tours. We haven't said anything, but we can't keep them off public property. Gabe felt the world tilt on its axis. It was one thing for his own reputation to be destroyed, but involving Mateo crossed a line that made him physically sick. Can you keep him inside until I get there? Of course. But Mr. Cruz, you should know that some of the other parents are asking questions too. They're concerned about whether Mateo's association with this situation might affect the school. After hanging up, Gabe turned back to the room full of lawyers and executives, all of whom were watching him with expressions ranging from sympathy to calculation. They're going after my son, he said quietly. Reporters at his school, questioning whether he's some kind of security risk. Aurora's composure finally cracked. That's unconscionable. He's 9 years old. But it's effective, Marcus observed. Nothing motivates a parent like threats to their child's well-being. The callousness of the statement hung in the air like toxic gas. Aurora stared at her half-brother with an expression that Gabe had never seen before, not anger, but something colder and more dangerous. Everyone out, Aurora said quietly, except Gabriel and Collins. Aurora, we need to make a decision, Marcus began. Everyone out. Now. When the room had cleared, Aurora walked to her safe and retrieved a small recording device. Gabriel, I want you to understand something. This attack on you and Mateo isn't random. It's a coordinated effort to remove me from operational control of this company. But why target us? Because you represent everything my family and the board find threatening about my leadership. You're a reminder that I value people over profit, that I make decisions based on personal conviction rather than purely financial considerations. She activated the recording device. This conversation needs to be documented. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that Marcus made a mistake. He's so focused on removing me that he's committed several federal crimes in the process. Fraud, computer intrusion, possibly conspiracy charges. Collins nodded grimly. The evidence trail is becoming clearer, but prosecuting will require Ms. Hale to take a very public stand against her own family. And it will require Gabriel to remain in the public eye while we build the case, Aurora added. Which means more media attention, more scrutiny of Mateo, more pressure on both of you. Gabe thought about his son, probably sitting in the principal's office wondering why reporters were asking about his dad's job, trying to understand why something that had been so exciting had suddenly become scary. What are my alternatives? You can take the settlement Marcus will offer, Aurora said. Disappear quietly, sign another NDA. Let them spin this as a security breach that was caught and contained. You and Mateo get financial compensation and a fresh start somewhere else. And you? I fight this battle alone, again. The choice crystallized with painful clarity. Gabe could protect his son by accepting defeat, or he could stand beside Aurora and risk everything in a fight that might destroy them both. Ms. Hale, he said finally, I need to pick up Mateo from school. But after that, I want to hear your plan for proving these documents are forgeries. Even if it means more media attention, more pressure on Mateo. Especially then, if we run now, Marcus wins, and people like him always find new targets. Aurora smiled for the first time since the crisis began. Collins, cancel my afternoon meetings. We have evidence to gather and a case to build. And Gabriel, she added as he prepared to leave. Bring Mateo here after school. It's safer than your apartment, and he might enjoy seeing how we're going to use technology to catch the people who tried to hurt us. As Gabe drove through the city toward Mateo's school, he realized that the comfortable routine they'd built over the past months was over. Whatever came next would test not just his relationship with Aurora, but his ability to protect his son while fighting for something larger than their own security. The forged documents had been meant to divide them. Instead, they had revealed the true battle lines and forced everyone to choose sides. Now it was time to discover what they were made of when everything was at stake. The security footage from Aurora's sedan became their lifeline, a digital thread that would either prove Gabe's innocence or confirm his guilt in the eyes of the world. Collins had discovered that the car's internal surveillance system captured not just the cabin conversations, but also recorded whenever Gabe accessed the vehicle's integrated communication systems that the forged evidence claimed he'd used to transmit confidential information. Every phone call, every email, every data transfer is time-stamped and encrypted, Collins explained as they reviewed the footage in Aurora's office. If Gabriel had been transmitting information through the car's systems, we'd have a record of it. Mateo sat quietly in the corner, working on his homework, while the adults dissected the evidence that would determine their future. He'd taken the reporters and the accusations with the resilience that children sometimes display when their world turns upside down. But Gabe could see the strain in the careful way his son colored inside the lines, in the precision with which he stacked his completed worksheets. The problem, Aurora said, studying the forensic analysis on her tablet, is that absence of evidence isn't the same as evidence of innocence. We can prove Gabriel didn't use the car's systems to transmit information, but we can't prove he didn't use other methods. But we can prove that the documents are forgeries, Collins added. The electronic signatures use authentication protocols that were changed after the dates on the documents. It's technically impossible for Gabriel to have signed these files when they claim he did. Aurora's phone buzzed with an urgent message. Dr. Martinez's office. Mateo's surgery has been moved up to Friday. Gabe felt his stomach drop. Why? What's wrong? His last cardiac workup showed some irregularities. Nothing immediately dangerous, but Dr. Martinez wants to proceed with the repair sooner rather than later. Mateo looked up from his homework, his 9-year-old mind processing the implications with devastating clarity. Am I getting sicker? No, Mijo, Gabe said, moving to kneel beside his son's chair. The doctors just want to fix your heart before you have any problems. It's actually good news. It means the surgery is going to happen. But what about all the reporters and the stories about Dad? Mateo's voice was small but steady. What if they follow us to the hospital? The question hit Gabe like a physical blow. In his focus on clearing his name and supporting Aurora's fight against her family, he'd lost sight of the most important consideration: his son's need for privacy and peace during the most frightening experience of his young life. Aurora stood and walked to the windows, her silhouette sharp against the afternoon sky. Gabriel, I want you to take a leave of absence. Focus entirely on Mateo's surgery and recovery. Let me handle the legal battle. You can't fight this alone. I've been fighting alone my entire career. This is just another boardroom battle with higher stakes. No, Gabe said firmly. This is different. This time you have allies who care about the outcome for personal reasons, not just professional ones. Collins cleared his throat diplomatically. If I may suggest a compromise, we proceed with gathering evidence and building the legal case, but we do it quietly. No press conferences, no public statements until after Mateo's surgery. Let Marcus think he's winning while we prepare our response. Aurora turned back to the room. Marcus is calling an emergency board meeting for Thursday. He's going to use this scandal to force a vote of no confidence in my leadership. And if the board sides with him, then I lose operational control of the company I built. Marcus becomes CEO, and the renewable energy initiatives get scaled back in favor of more financially prudent projects. Mateo had been following the conversation with the intense focus he brought to everything that mattered. Ms. Aurora, he said quietly, can I ask you something? Of course. If you lose your company, will you still be able to help other kids learn about solar energy? The question hung in the air like a challenge to everyone's priorities. Aurora walked over to Mateo's chair and knelt down so they were at eye level. What do you think? She asked. Do you think learning about renewable energy requires a big company and fancy equipment? Mateo considered this seriously. No. You taught me more in the car than I learned in school, and all we had was my solar car project and your stories about how things work. Exactly. The most important work helping people understand that they can be part of the solution that doesn't require corporate titles or board approval. But you could help more people if you kept your company right. Probably. But sometimes you have to choose between doing what's safe and doing what's right. Dad always says that doing what's right is more important than doing what's easy. Aurora glanced at Gabe with something that looked like admiration. Your father is a wise man. The evening brought an unexpected visitor. Rebecca Patterson from the Education Foundation appeared at Aurora's office with a briefcase full of documents and a determination that surprised everyone. I've been following the news coverage, she said without preamble. The accusations against Gabriel, the questions about your judgment, the timing of everything relative to our funding discussions. Rebecca, I understand if the foundation needs to reconsider, Aurora began. Actually, I'm here to accelerate our timeline. The Patterson Foundation is prepared to fully fund the school's solar project, regardless of the outcome of your current legal situation. The announcement stunned everyone into silence. Finally, Gabe found his voice. But the scandal, the questions about my background, are exactly why we're moving forward, Rebecca replied. I've spent 30 years in educational philanthropy, Gabriel. I've learned to recognize the difference between actual security risks and manufactured controversies. This has all the hallmarks of corporate sabotage. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a funding agreement. $50,000 for the pilot installation at Lincoln Elementary, with an option for additional funding based on results. The money is contingent on Gabriel serving as community outreach coordinator, working directly with students and families. You want me to take the position despite the accusations? I want you to take the position because of how you've handled the accusations. Anyone can look good when things are going well. Character shows when everything falls apart. Aurora studied the contract with the focused intensity she brought to all important documents. This is incredibly generous, Rebecca, but it also makes you a target. Marcus and his allies won't hesitate to attack the Foundation if they think it will help their case. Let them try. The Patterson Foundation has been supporting educational innovation for 40 years. We don't change our mission based on boardroom politics. As they reviewed the funding details, Mateo raised his hand like he was in school. Ms. Patterson, can I ask you something? Of course. If Dad becomes the community outreach coordinator, does that mean other kids will get to build solar cars like mine? That's exactly what it means. Your dad will teach them the same things he taught you about renewable energy and scientific thinking. Mateo's smile was radiant. That's the coolest job ever. That night, as they prepared to leave Aurora's office, Gabe felt the weight of the next few days settling on his shoulders. Mateo's surgery on Friday would determine his son's physical future, while Thursday's board meeting would determine Aurora's professional fate. The convergence of timing felt both coincidental and inevitable. Miss Hale, he said as they waited for the elevator, whatever happens on Thursday, I want you to know that these past months have been the most meaningful work I've ever done. Even with the corporate sabotage and media scandal, especially because of that. You've shown me what it looks like to fight for something important, even when the odds are stacked against you. Aurora was quiet for a moment, watching Mateo organize his backpack with the methodical care he brought to all his projects. Gabriel, can I ask you something personal? Sure. Are you afraid about Friday about the surgery? Gabe considered lying, offering false confidence for Mateo's sake. Instead, he chose honesty. Terrified. But not about the surgery itself. Dr. Martinez is excellent, and the procedure has a high success rate. I'm afraid about everything else. About whether I'm making the right choices, whether I'm protecting Mateo or putting him at risk. You're protecting him, Aurora said with quiet certainty. You're showing him that some things are worth fighting for, that integrity matters more than convenience. Those are lessons that will serve him his entire life. As the elevator carried them down to the parking garage, Gabe reflected on how completely their lives had changed since that first morning when he'd arrived precisely at 6 a.m. to drive Aurora to her meetings. What had begun as a desperate attempt to pay for his son's medical care had become something much larger, a fight for the kind of world they wanted Mateo to inherit. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new evidence to review, new strategies to develop. But tonight, they were simply three people who had found each other in the midst of a storm, each offering the others something they'd been missing. Aurora had found family, Gabe had found purpose, and Mateo had found a mentor who saw his potential and celebrated his curiosity. The security footage would either save them or condemn them. The board meeting would either vindicate Aurora's leadership or end her control of the company she'd built from nothing. But regardless of those outcomes, they had already won something more valuable than corporate titles or legal victories. They had proven that trust and loyalty weren't luxuries in a competitive world, but necessities for building anything worth fighting for. As they drove through the quiet city streets toward home, Mateo fell asleep in the back seat, his small hand still clutching the solar panel kit that had started everything. In the rearview mirror, Gabe could see Aurora watching the sleeping boy with an expression of fierce protectiveness that reminded him that some bonds transcend professional relationships or family obligations. Tomorrow would test everything they had built together. But tonight, they were exactly where they needed to be, moving forward, through the darkness, powered by hope and guided by the conviction that the best days of their lives weren't behind them, but waiting just ahead, on the other side of whatever challenges Friday would bring. Aurora's resignation letter sat on her desk like a loaded weapon, each word carefully chosen to inflict maximum damage on the board members who had orchestrated her downfall. The document represented months of frustration, years of fighting for environmental initiatives that were constantly questioned and undermined, and the final recognition that some battles could only be won by walking away. Ms. Hale, Collins said quietly, as he reviewed the security footage one final time. "We have everything we need to prove the documents were forged. The timestamp analysis, the signature authentication failures, the communication logs showing Gabriel never accessed confidential systems. And how long will it take to present that evidence in a way that clears his name publicly? Weeks, possibly months. Legal proceedings move slowly, and Marcus has already shaped the media narrative." Aurora picked up the resignation letter, feeling its weight like a physical thing. "But if I resign immediately, taking full responsibility for the security breach, Gabriel becomes a victim rather than a perpetrator. The media attention shifts to corporate governance failures instead of personal betrayal." The board meeting was scheduled to begin in 20 minutes. Through her office windows, Aurora could see the members arriving, powerful men and women whose primary concern was protecting their investments rather than advancing renewable energy technology. Her father was among them, flown in from Tokyo specifically for this confrontation, his disappointment in her unconventional leadership style evident in every carefully worded email over the past year. "There's another consideration," Collins added. "If you resign under these circumstances, you forfeit your rights to the company's intellectual property. The patents, the technology developments, the research initiatives, everything becomes Marcus's to control or abandon. But the school project gets funded regardless, thanks to the Patterson Foundation, and Gabriel gets to do the work he was meant to do." Aurora's phone buzzed with a text from Gabe. "Mateo in pre-op, surgery starting soon. Thank you for everything." The message crystallized her decision with painful clarity. While she was fighting a boardroom battle over corporate control, Gabe was facing something infinitely more important: his son's medical procedure and recovery. The contrast made her corporate troubles feel simultaneously urgent and trivial. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Marcus entered without waiting for permission, his expression carrying the satisfaction of someone who had anticipated this moment for years. "Aurora, the board is ready for you." "I'm sure they are. This doesn't have to be adversarial. If you're willing to step back from operational control, accept a consulting role, we can manage this transition smoothly." Aurora studied her half-brother's face, looking for any trace of the person she'd once thought she knew. "Tell me something, Marcus. Was Gabriel always the target, or was he just convenient?" "I don't know what you mean. The timing, the sophistication of the forgeries, the way the story broke just before the board meeting. Either you've been planning this for months, or you have remarkably good luck." Marcus's careful neutrality slipped slightly. "Aurora, you've always been too trusting, too willing to believe that everyone shares your idealistic motivations. Gabriel Cruz is a single father with massive financial pressures. The idea that he might compromise security for money isn't exactly far-fetched. Except that he didn't. The evidence proves that conclusively. Evidence that will take months to present and years to fully vindicate him. By then, the damage to the company's reputation will be irreversible." Aurora stood and walked to her safe, removing the resignation letter, along with another documenta, comprehensive analysis of the forged evidence prepared by Collins and an outside cybersecurity firm. "You're right about one thing," she said. "This situation has damaged the company's reputation, but not in the way you think." The boardroom felt like a tribunal, with Aurora's father presiding from the head of a table that seemed designed to emphasize hierarchy and intimidation. The other members, investment bankers, technology executives, energy industry veterans, regarded her with expressions ranging from disappointment to barely concealed hostility. "Aurora," her father began, his voice carrying the formal distance that had characterized their relationship since childhood. "We're here to discuss the security breach involving your personal driver and the implications for company governance." "Actually," Aurora replied, placing both documents on the table, "we're here to discuss corporate sabotage and my response to it." The room went silent, except for the soft hum of climate control systems. Aurora activated the wall-mounted display and began presenting the forensic analysis that proved the documents were sophisticated forgeries. "The electronic signatures use authentication protocols that were changed 3 months ago," she explained. her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was alleging. The financial records reference account numbers that were never assigned to Gabriel Cruz. The communication logs show activities that are technically impossible given our security architecture. Marcus leaned forward, his prepared arguments clearly disrupted by the thoroughness of her presentation. Aurora, even if these specific documents are questionable, the broader security concerns remain valid. You're absolutely right, Aurora agreed, turning to the next slide. The broader security concerns are extremely valid. Someone, with inside access to our systems, archived authentication keys, and detailed knowledge of our operations, has been conducting a systematic campaign to undermine company leadership. She looked directly at Marcus as she continued. The question is whether the board wants to address the actual security threat or continue pursuing a narrative that serves certain political interests. Her father's expression had shifted from disappointment to calculation. Aurora, what exactly are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that someone used Gabriel Cruz as a weapon against me, knowing that attacking my personal judgment about staff would be more effective than challenging my professional competence directly. The evidence was comprehensive and damning. Phone records showing Marcus's communications with external cybersecurity consultants who specialized in reputation management. Financial transfers that corresponded to the timeline of the document creation. Most devastatingly, archived system logs that showed someone with Marcus's access credentials downloading Gabriel's personnel files and company communication protocols. This is preposterous, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. You're accusing your own family of... I'm presenting evidence to the board and letting them draw their own conclusions, Aurora interrupted. Just as you did when you brought the forged documents to their attention. The silence stretched painfully as board members reviewed the evidence on their tablets. Aurora could see the calculations happening in real time, the recognition that they had been manipulated, the understanding that their rush to judgment had made them complicit in corporate sabotage. Ms. Hale, said Janet Morrison, the board's longest-serving member, assuming this evidence is accurate, what are you proposing as next steps? Aurora picked up the resignation letter, holding it so everyone could see the document they had expected her to deliver. Then, deliberately, she tore it in half. I'm proposing that we refer this matter to federal investigators for criminal prosecution. Corporate fraud, computer intrusion, and conspiracy charges are all applicable here. She looked directly at Marcus. I'm also proposing that any board member who participated in or benefited from this sabotage consider their own legal exposure. The shift in the room's dynamics was palpable. Marcus had gone pale, while several board members were clearly reconsidering their positions. Aurora's father sat back in his chair, studying his daughter with what might have been respect for the first time in years. Aurora, he said finally, this is a serious accusation to make against family. It's a serious crime to commit against family, she replied. Gabriel Cruz and his 9-year-old son were used as weapons in a corporate power struggle that crosses lines that can't be uncrossed. As the board began discussing next steps investigations, legal reviews, damage control strategies, Aurora's phone buzzed with another message from Gabe. Surgery successful. Mateo asking for Miss Aurora when he wakes up. The message transformed her victory into something much more meaningful than corporate vindication. Somewhere across the city, a little boy was waking up with a repaired heart, asking for the woman who had helped him build solar cars and dream about becoming a scientist. That relationship, that trust, that unexpected family they had created, that was what the whole fight had been about. She had kept the company, exposed the sabotage, and protected Gabriel's reputation. But more importantly, she had proven that some bonds were stronger than corporate politics, that loyalty and trust could survive even sophisticated attempts to destroy them. As the board meeting concluded with Marcus's suspension and plans for criminal referrals, Aurora felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The satisfaction of fighting for something personal instead of merely professional, and winning not just the battle, but the right to keep building the family she had never expected to find. The new teaching contract lay spread across the hospital table like a promise of redemption, its pages bright white against the muted colors of the pediatric recovery ward. Gabe had read it 3 times while Mateo slept, still unable to fully process that his professional dreams were becoming reality, even as his personal world had been turned upside down and set right again. Community Outreach Coordinator for Educational Initiatives, the title read, followed by salary figures that would secure Mateo's future and job responsibilities that perfectly matched everything Gabe had ever wanted to do professionally. Aurora had somehow managed to formalize his position, even while fighting for her own survival, ensuring that regardless of the corporate battle's outcome, the school project would continue. "Dad?" Mateo's voice was soft but clear, pulling Gabe's attention back to what mattered most. "Hey, Joe, how are you feeling?" "Tired, but different, like there's more room in my chest." Mateo touched the surgical dressing over his heart with careful fingers. "Dr. Martinez says the repair worked perfectly." "That's wonderful news, buddy. You're going to be able to do anything you want now, run, play soccer, build solar cars that are too heavy to carry." Mateo smiled, though it was still shadowed by the exhaustion of surgery and anesthesia. "Is Ms. Aurora okay? I heard nurses talking about something on the news." Gabe had been dreading this conversation, trying to figure out how to explain corporate sabotage and family betrayal to a 9-year-old who had spent the past few hours having his heart surgically repaired. "She's more than okay," he said finally. "She won. The people who were trying to hurt our family got caught, and now she gets to keep helping kids learn about renewable energy." "Our family?" The words had slipped out naturally, but Gabe realized they were accurate in ways that transcended traditional definitions. "Yes, Joe. I think that's what we've become." The door opened quietly, and Aurora appeared carrying flowers, balloons, and what looked like a new book about electrical engineering for young readers. She moved carefully, as if entering a sacred space, her usual corporate confidence replaced by something gentler. "How's our patient?" she asked, settling into the chair beside Mateo's bed. "Really good," Mateo said, his energy returning as he saw Aurora's gifts. "Dad says you won your fight with the bad guys." "We won," Aurora corrected. "All of us together. And do you know what that means?" "What?" "It means your dad gets to become a teacher again, working with kids just like you to build solar projects and learn about making the world better." Mateo's eyes lit up, despite his fatigue. "Really? Dad, you get to teach again?" "Better than teaching," Gabe said, showing Mateo the contract. "I get to help whole communities learn about renewable energy, starting with your old school. Lincoln Elementary is getting solar panels?" "A complete installation," Aurora confirmed, "enough to power the entire building, with educational components that will let students monitor energy production and learn about how solar systems work. And other kids will get to build projects like mine. Even better projects. Your dad is going to design a curriculum that starts with basic concepts and builds up to sophisticated engineering challenges. By the time students graduate from Lincoln, they'll understand renewable energy better than most college students." Dr. Martinez arrived for the evening checkup, her professional smile widening as she observed Mateo's improved color and energy level. "This young man is healing beautifully," she announced after reviewing his monitors and listening to his heart. "The repair is perfect, blood flow is optimal, and I expect a complete recovery." "When can I go back to school?" Mateo asked. 2 weeks of rest at home, then gradually return to normal activities. By Christmas, you'll be able to do anything your friends can do." After Dr. Martinez left, Aurora pulled out her phone and showed Mateo a series of photographs from the afternoon board meeting. "I wanted you to see something," she said. "These are pictures of the board members reviewing the evidence that proved your dad's innocence." The photos showed serious-faced executives studying documents, their expressions shifting from skepticism to understanding to what looked like embarrassment. In the final photo, Marcus was leaving the boardroom with the defeated posture of someone whose schemes had been exposed. The bad guy looked sad, Mateo observed. He should be, Aurora replied. He tried to hurt good people to get what he wanted, and that never works in the long run. Will he go to jail? Probably. What he did was against the law, and laws exist to protect people like your dad, who are just trying to do the right thing. As evening settled over the city, Aurora prepared to leave so that Gabe and Mateo could rest. But at the door she paused and turned back to them. Gabriel, there's something else. The Patterson Foundation funding is just the beginning. 3 other organizations have committed to supporting the program after seeing how we handled this crisis. The school solar project is going to become a model for districts across the state. How many schools? Gabe asked. Initially, 12. Eventually, if the pilot program proves successful, we could be looking at hundreds of installations over the next 5 years. The scope of the opportunity was staggering. Gabe had dreamed of returning to teaching, but this was something much larger, the chance to influence how an entire generation thought about energy, environment, and their role in solving global challenges. Miss Aurora, Mateo said sleepily, will you still come see my solar car projects even though Dad has a new job? Mateo, I'm not going anywhere. Your dad and I are going to be working together for a long time. Good. I like our family the way it is. After Aurora left, Gabe sat beside Mateo's bed, watching his son sleep, marveling at how completely their lives had transformed. 3 months ago, he had been a desperate father taking a job nobody wanted, hoping to earn enough money to save his son's life. Now Mateo's heart was repaired. Gabe had found his professional calling, and they had gained a family member whose loyalty had been tested by fire and proven unbreakable. The morning would bring discharge papers, recovery plans, and the beginning of Gabe's new career. But tonight, in the quiet of the hospital room, he felt a peace he hadn't experienced in years. They had survived the storm together, stronger for having been tested, ready to build the future they had glimpsed in those first conversations about solar cars and renewable dreams. Outside the hospital windows, the city lights stretched toward the horizon like a constellation of human possibility. Somewhere in that vast grid of energy and ambition, children were sleeping who would someday learn about science and sustainability in classrooms powered by the sun, taught by teachers who understood that education was about more than just transferring information. It was about inspiring young minds to believe they could solve the problems they inherited and create a world worth passing on. The best days of their lives were no longer a promise for the future. They were beginning right now, in this quiet room where a boy slept with a perfectly repaired heart, dreaming of solar cars and scientific adventures yet to come. 6 months later, the family photo captured a moment that would have been impossible to imagine on that first morning when Gabe had arrived precisely at 6 a.m. to drive Aurora to her meetings. The 3 of them stood in front of Lincoln Elementary School, grinning at the camera while behind them, newly installed solar panels gleamed in the afternoon sun like a promise kept. Mateo, his color healthy and his energy boundless since the surgery, held up his latest creazione, solar-powered weather station that monitored temperature, humidity, and energy production in real time. The data fed directly to tablets in every classroom, where students could track how environmental conditions affected power generation and learn to think like scientists and engineers. "Say renewable energy," called out Rebecca Patterson, who had insisted on taking the photo herself to commemorate the pilot program's official launch. Aurora laughed a sound that had become more frequent and natural over the past months, while Gabe wrapped his arms around both his son and the woman who had become so much more than his former employer. The family photo would eventually find its place on Aurora's desk, replacing the stark corporate awards that had once defined her office's personality. The transformation of Lincoln Elementary had exceeded everyone's expectations. The solar installation not only met the school's energy needs, but generated surplus power that was sold back to the grid, creating a revenue stream that funded new science equipment and teacher training programs. More importantly, the project had sparked a renaissance of environmental consciousness throughout the community. "Mr. Cruz," called out a familiar voice, and Gabe turned to see his former principal, Mrs. Pratt. Rodriguez, approaching with a group of students who had been working on their own solar projects. The kids wanted to show you their latest experiments. The students, ranging from kindergarten through 5th grade, eagerly displayed their creations: solar-powered fans, light-up art projects, and miniature vehicles that raced across the playground using nothing but sunlight. Their enthusiasm was infectious, their understanding of renewable energy concepts sophisticated enough to impress college professors. "This is amazing work," Gabe told them, kneeling down to examine a particularly clever solar-powered irrigation system designed by a 3rd grader. "You're thinking like real engineers. Miss Aurora taught us that engineering is just problem-solving with science," the girl explained proudly. "We had a problem with keeping our school garden watered, so we solved it with solar power." Aurora beamed at the recognition, but Gabe could see the deeper satisfaction in her expression. These children weren't just learning about renewable energy, they were developing the mindset that would make them environmental stewards for life. The afternoon celebration continued in the newly renovated library, where displays showcased student projects from across the 12 schools, now participating in the expanded program. Each installation had become a community hub, drawing parents and neighbors who wanted to understand how their local school was contributing to both education and environmental sustainability. "The impact reports are extraordinary," James Meridian explained to a group of potential investors who had come to see the program's results firsthand. "Test scores in science and mathematics have improved significantly at every participating school, but more importantly, we're seeing increased engagement with environmental issues across entire families." Gabe listened to the conversations swirling around them, teachers sharing lesson plans, students explaining their projects to impressed adults, administrators planning expansions to other districts. The program had grown beyond anyone's initial vision, becoming a model for integrated environmental education that was being studied and replicated across the country. "Dad," Mateo said, tugging on Gabe's sleeve, "can I show everyone the new car I built?" The latest solar car was a marvel of 9-year-old engineering, incorporating lessons learned from months of experimentation and access to professional-grade components. It was faster, more efficient, and more elegant than anything Mateo had built before, but it still carried the same spirit of curiosity and innovation that had started everything. As Mateo demonstrated his car's capabilities to an audience of students, teachers, and visiting dignitaries, Gabe felt Aurora's hand slip into his. The gesture was natural now, comfortable in a way that corporate relationships rarely achieved. "Any regrets?" she asked quietly. "About which part? Losing the driving job? Nearly getting destroyed by corporate sabotage? Having my son's medical crisis coincide with a boardroom coup? About taking a job nobody wanted and having it change everything?" Gabe considered the question seriously, looking around at the celebration that surrounded them. Mateo was healthy and thriving, his curiosity about science matched by opportunities to explore and learn that exceeded anything Gabe could have provided alone. Aurora had found the family connection she'd never thought she wanted, while Gabe had discovered work that combined his passion for education with his growing understanding of renewable energy technology. "The only regret I have," he said finally, "is that it took me so long to realize that the best days of our lives weren't something we had to wait for. They were right here, waiting for us to recognize them." Aurora squeezed his hand, her smile carrying the warmth that had replaced her corporate armor. "Mateo was right, you know, about us being a family. He usually is. He gets that from his scientific training, careful observation, logical conclusions, willingness to revise hypotheses based on new evidence. And where does he get his sense of humor? That's definitely from me, although his renewable energy jokes are getting more sophisticated since he started working with you." As the celebration continued around them, Gabe reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The crumpled job posting that had started everything was long gone, but its impact continued to ripple outward through the lives of students who would grow up understanding that they could be part of the solution to humanity's greatest challenges. The family photo would capture this particular afternoon, but it represented something larger, the recognition that families come in many forms, that the most meaningful relationships often develop in unexpected ways, and that the work we do matters most when it connects to the people we love. Marcus had been convicted on multiple federal charges and sentenced to 3 years in prison. His attempts to destroy Aurora's leadership, resulting instead in the strengthening of her position and the expansion of her influence. The board had publicly apologized and restructured its governance to prevent future sabotage attempts, while Aurora's father had finally acknowledged his daughter's vision and leadership with something approaching pride. But the real victory wasn't corporate or legal, it was personal. It was visible in Mateo's boundless energy and scientific curiosity, in Aurora's genuine laughter and growing comfort with emotional connection, in Gabe's satisfaction with work that made a difference in individual lives rather than just institutional budgets. As the sun set behind the school's solar panels, casting long shadows across the playground where children were still experimenting with their projects, Gabe realized that the best days of their lives weren't marked by wealth or status, but by the unexpected family they had forged together, a family where courage rode shotgun and hope took the wheel, where solar cars raced across kitchen tables and dreams, powered by sunlight, illuminated futures bright enough to guide them home. The journey from that first desperate morning to this moment of celebration had taught them all that some jobs are more than employment. They're opportunities to discover who we're meant to become when we're brave enough to trust each other with our dreams. And in the back seat of their shared adventure, surrounded by the laughter of children learning to build a better world, they had found something more valuable than any salary. They had found each other, and in doing so, had discovered that the most important work of all is creating families strong enough to change the world, one solar panel and one scientific mind at a time.